My name is Carl Gillespie. Call order Joint Legislative Commission on Governmental Operations Subcommittee on Hurricane Response and Recovery. Thank you for all who made the trip today. Some of us came further than others. We'd like to thank East Carolina University for making this meeting possible. I'd like to also recognize our Sergeant at Arms. From the North Carolina House, we have Joanna Cherry, Michael Galloway, David Leeton, and Stafford Young. Our friends in North Carolina Senate, Gary Bridges, John Enlow, Tracy Kerr, Matthew Lee. Also, I'd like to thank General Assembly of Police, House of Legislative Assistant Director Ann Duck, Brooke Mason for making this off-site meeting possible. There's a lot of moving pieces to make that, and we appreciate all those efforts. Today we will hear from State Auditor Dave Bullock and from Pryor Gibson, Director of North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, or NCORE, to discuss matters we've talked about before. Thank both of you for being here. This is our sixth hearing in the past 3 years on NCORE's performance. Repairing or replacing homes damaged by Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence. NCORE has faced well-documented challenges in managing its processes, data, and budget, which ultimately resulted in a $300 million bailout from the General Assembly. The State Auditor's report highlights these issues, including a mismanaged budget, significant overspending, and lengthy multi-year process for homeowners. Earlier this year, Director Gibson promised this subcommittee that he would do everything humanly possible to have the work completed by December 31st. Our friends in eastern North Carolina have suffered, first from the effects of the terrible storms, and then again due to the ineffective government response. Now 9 years later, after Matthew, and 7 years after Florence, NCORE is coming to the finish line. As of the end of October, 328 families are still in the program. 74 of those homes seemingly unlikely to be completed based on what NCORE is providing. What is NCORE's plan for these families? How much of NCORE's remaining $86 million will it use? How much will it have left in the end? Or how many families promised help from NCORE when they rely on others? As NCORE finishes its work, recovery in Western North Carolina is just getting started. Governor Stein chose to set up a completely different structure to manage that effort. The folks running Grow NC seem to have learned lessons from NCORE's failures and are already doing some things an audit report recommends. We'd like to hear from Director Gibson and Auditor Bullock on what advice they can give Grow NC. I'd like to thank NCORE Director Pryor Gibson and Auditor Bullock for being here today, and we look forward to hear what you have to say. I now recognize my co-chair, Senator Brent Jackson, who'd like to make a few opening comments.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Gillespie. And I want to thank my members and folks that have traveled a little further west than I had to travel from. But welcome to Eastern North Carolina. I think those of us that live in Eastern North Carolina, we just want to welcome you to God's country. So we appreciate y'all coming. State Auditor Bullock, we appreciate you being here. Look forward to hearing what you've got to say. And Director Gibson, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you got to say. And remember what I told you. You know, as I've told you many times, you know, you can do it in 5 minutes or less. But thank y'all for being here. And Chairman Gillespie, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. We'll begin with State Auditor, Mr. Bullock. Please step forward and we'll administer the oath. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that your testimony is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bullock, we will listen to what you have to say. And after that, we will, if it's okay with you, we'll open it up to the committee for questions.
That'd be great. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It is an honor to also be here at East Carolina University. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention first my staff that is with me. Vernon Utley, he is our deputy who is in charge of performance audits. He is a career state auditor, civil servant who has dedicated the vast majority of his professional life to the state auditor's office. He actually has risen to the level of deputy auditor in charge of performance just over the last 5 months, I think. So appreciate Vernon being here, and Katie Gleason is also here. If you'd stand up, she is the director of the Performance Audit Division. I also have my Chief of Staff, Brent Woodcox, who's present, Kirk Osteen, who is Director of Government Affairs, Dave Fox, who works with our Government Affairs Division, is also here, and Randy Breitschel, who is our Communications Director, is also here today. We at the auditor's office, one of the primary things we also do in addition to these type of performance audits is we do perform financial statement audits across institutions and organizations in state government, and that includes East Carolina University, where we released our audit just in the last 2 weeks of East Carolina University, and they received a clean audit report. And I would be remiss if I did not, on behalf of the people of North Carolina, thank this body for the $380 million that the legislature appropriated to East Carolina University to help make this an affordable place for people in eastern North Carolina and across our state to get an education. So I wanted to mention that. With respect to NCOR, I am Dave Bolick, very proud to be the state auditor. We're here to present our report on the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, and this will be the first of ongoing reports. The legislation that this body passed envisioned that we would continue to the very end of NCOR's existence, and we intend to do that, and I'll get to that at the end of my presentation. But clearly, NCOR resulted since both Hurricanes Matthew and Florence, so it's been in existence since 2016, 2017. And those are two disasters, and quite frankly, the third disaster that this state has experienced is NCOR itself. When families lose their home through NCOR, it took an average of 4 years before hammers started to swing. Families had to spend as many as 1,400 or more days in a hotel. And the government has spent $1 billion in taxpayer funds to address this issue, which has become a logistical nightmare to families across eastern North Carolina. So that being said, our report does illustrate some of the evidence that points to the problems. But also, what I want to focus on, and I talked about this yesterday in Goldsboro when we first released the audit, is how can we turn this into a productive exercise moving forward for the state of North Carolina? It'd be real easy for the state auditor to sit up here and simply talk about how bad NCOR was and their performance. And we're going to point out some of those deficiencies. But I think the productive way for our office to serve the people of North Carolina and this body is to talk about ways that we recommend moving forward with disasters in North Carolina. So our team did not simply set out to say, okay, this is wrong. We also committed ourselves to being part of the solution. All right, you can go ahead. In accordance with Session Law 2457, we did this assessment of NCOR, and that was to address both Hurricane Matthew and Florence. Now, our focus was on the home recovery program. That's what we really looked at it from the point of view of what does this body really want to know about. We could have gone in a lot of different directions in looking at NCOR, Because NCORE, quite frankly, and I'm sure that Director Gibson can confirm this, is a complicated organization in many respects. But what this body wants to hear about and what the public wants to know about is the home recovery program. So, with that in mind, that's what our focus was. What was our objectives? We wanted to identify systematic challenges. We wanted to assess the adequacy of internal controls and program management, and we wanted to provide actionable recovery solutions to move forward. NCORE was funded with more than $1 billion, $709 million from federal community block grant, $297 million from state appropriations. And our audit does detail those sources of funds, and you can see it on our slide. They're not up. Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. It's in our report, but that's you guys have seen these numbers before, but I'll for purposes of the record, Matthew, $207,635,032. Florence, $457,144,299. October 24th of 24, this body appropriated $30 million. There was a transfer to the NCORE program of $44,174,078. This body then appropriated in December of 24 an additional $50 million. This body further appropriated in March of this year $217 million for a total of just over $1 billion. NCORE's flagship program was to provide financial and logistical support to help eligible homeowners repair, reconstruct, replace, and elevate their homes. Homeowners were required to submit a completed application with supporting documentation. Our report focused on this flagship program. We did not examine every dollar NCORE operated with. Only dollars that really were associated with the homeowner recovery program. And let me stop there, and I want to talk about that a little bit. We started our journey of looking into NCORE late winter, early spring of 2025. I brought in some experienced accountants and brought our team together. And I got to tell you, the folks that I brought in took a look at it, said it was the worst government program they'd ever seen. The inability to be able to print out or even produce a relevant and a reliable data source of a financial statement or a financial position, you just couldn't do it with NCORE. It was not possible without a tremendous amount of work. And that's when we made a tactical decision to focus on the homeowner recovery program, because, and Deputy Utley can testify to this as well, it would, and I'm glad to glad to work on reconstructing NCORE's entire data point and financial position. I'm going to need about $1 million to $2 million in additional appropriations from this body to get that done. And that just seems to me to be a waste of taxpayer dollars, because we do have a lot of water under the bridge on this, and we generally know the total amount of money. Moving forward, I mentioned at the beginning of this testimony that we wanted to be productive, and we want to be able to give this body and the people a real picture of how money was spent, on the ground, in the boots on the ground position. So our next step, as the legislation envisions, is us to continue this. We're going to use our authority, but we're going to work collectively with businesses that were paid by NCORE to produce results on behalf of the taxpayers of North Carolina. Why are we going to do that? We're going to do that for two reasons. Number one, it's the businesses themselves. And let me say this, and I said this yesterday, and I think this is very important. The businesses and contractors that have done work on behalf of the people of North Carolina through NCORE, they are not folks that showed up at the senior citizen's front door and knocked on the door to say, hey, we want to fix your roof. They were invited by the state of North Carolina to work and produce on behalf of the people of North Carolina. That envisions a two-way street. That envisions a state of North Carolina apparatus that works collaboratively with businesses to get positive results. One of the top line findings that we certainly found was the fact that there was a real lack of contractual metrics and key performance indicators in contracts when NCOR was first stood up. And let me talk about contracts for a minute, because to my left and your right on the table next to me are part of the contracts that NCOR used. Now, I know it's not going to pick up real good on the volume, but this is part of the problem right here. I mean, when you've got this, and by the way, I could have printed 3,000 more pages of contracts, but I told them to stop because I didn't want to waste the paper. This right here is certainly part of the problem. And I talked to Director Gibson about it. It's not necessarily Director Gibson or NCOR's complete fault on this. It's not. It's part of the regulatory process, not only from the state, not only from local, but from the federal government as well. But this right here is a bureaucratic malaise that we've got to solve moving forward, because we're going to have disasters in the future. That being said, when we do contract with businesses to provide a service, we need to competently and together work for reasonable expectations on both sides of that contractual agreement. And that being said, contractors have to be able to rely on the state apparatus to allow them to do the work. They have to be able to, when they bring boots on the ground and bring teams in to produce, from a business standpoint, you have contractors, and I've talked to a bunch of them, and I know many of you on this panel have as well, and Senator Jarvis, you are a contractor, so you know exactly how this works. You know, particularly if we've got folks that are standing up teams to get a job done, and they're having to wait on regulatory approval. Their teams are in hotels or they're in campers. They're waiting to do the work. We've got to be swift with respect to approvals through whatever program gets stood up in response to disasters, so we can more efficiently serve our contractual partners, right? Help them do the job for us, because business can do things more efficiently than the state. So we've got to work as a partner with those contractors to get the job done. Now, that leads to one of the, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but this stuff, never in a million years that I think I'd be jazzed to be the state auditor, but I like this stuff. I really care about this stuff. And got into it to find out exactly the full story, and I've got to really credit my team for educating and help getting me educated on this. But this contractual process and this arrangement that we have with contractors has to be more efficient with respect to providing measurable metrics, so that a Director Gibson in the future has the ability to hold the contractor accountable. Like I said, it's both ways. That's a two-way street, right? We've got to provide an environment for the contractor to be successful, but we also have to hold that contractor accountable for the spending of tax dollars as well, right? So it is a two-way street. The best way to do that is to have tight metrics and to have contracts that we envision fully on the front end, so that there are reasonable expectations between both parties. That simply did not exist when NCOR was stood up. Those metrics were not in place in the contracts. Our team reviewed those contracts. There were no measurables. I'll give NCOR credit that by 2022, they changed that contracting process. And the biggest change that Encore made, and we show this in our report, was they took over the governance of the contracting process. We brought in Craig Fugate, who is an expert in this field. He was the FEMA director under President Obama. He also worked in Florida with their emergency management. So he worked in Katrina. He started with Hurricane Andrew in Florida, and you know, I got gray hair. I remember that. And he started there. So he's got a tremendous amount of experience in this arena. And he brought to the forefront several thoughts on this. One is you cannot outsource governance. You can't, and that's the way Encore started. Encore started with the outsource of governance. And I can direct you to our report on page, give you why we included this, page 20 of our report, Exhibit 9. And I don't know that you necessarily have that, and if you don't, I'll rip this out and let Elm pass it down, but I want to highlight something from our report, and it is a chart that shows that when the vendor management was running the program, that on a monthly case management basis, so when someone applied for the program, the contractor received $480 a month for that application to be in the queue. The monthly project management envisioned an 18-month window. So that's $480 a month for up to 18 months. Now, that 18 months was not in stone, but that's what was envisioned by the project management. So you can do that math pretty quick. That is a tremendous amount of money, a little over $8,000 that would go just to have someone in the queue for about 18 months. And that's without necessarily a decision. So there was no timetable and no measurable set. You've got to have decisions made by a certain time period. I'm going to pass this around so you can take a look at it. You got another copy of that, page 20. Put that in the report as evidence of vendor management versus governance management. And I said yesterday, and I'll say it again, I give Director Gibson a lot of credit for the governance that Encore has had since he took over the program. You cannot outsource governance. The state has to govern the process. That's how we hold the vendor accountable, and that's how we make that partnership between the vendor and the state actually work. If you just let it go, it's going to run on its own timetable. We have to have better governance with respect to these contracts. And I think Encore's got it right now with respect to their governance standpoint. So again, I think our data shows that. The increase in effectiveness and rebuilds over the last 14 months has been substantial compared to the previous 5 years. So again, I'm giving credit where credit is due with respect to the work that Encore has done. You know, Craig Fugate gave some additional really good insights into this whole process. Put the application process up there. The application process, based on available data, 11,654 applications submitted to the home program. As of April 25, Encore had completed 3,522 recovery projects. And our report details that process. The real issue is that it took an average of 138 days to assess the Home Recovery Program's application eligibility to get to the second of what were 8 steps. Now, 8 steps is a lot of steps because it took an average of 936 days, which is about 2.5 years, for a grant determination. And on average, INCOR did not commence construction, or what we in our office call swinging hammers, on eligible projects until approximately 4 years after the homeowners were deemed eligible for the HRP program. That's just too long. And that is where, when we brought in our expert and we talked to him and we talked to several other experts across the field, we've got to be careful moving forward not to put process above outcomes. And these boxes to my left represent a lot of process. The 8 steps addresses and is illustration of a lot of process. I will say, as an aside, we have a dual problem here. We got a lot of process, and INCOR, quite frankly, didn't do very good on the process. They spent a lot of money and a lot of time on the process, and still didn't do really well on the process. But making that process more efficient will certainly help with moving forward for us to be able to get better outcomes on the ground. So we got to shorten the process. You know, you could take a look at some of the monies that we did spend. We spent $74.4 million on temporary relocation assistance. Well, let's break that down. $26.9 million in stipends, $1 million+ in apartments, $5.3 million in lodging with family and friends, $28 million to hotels, and more than $13 million in storage. I mean, my team said we could have built several storage complexes pretty quick with $13 million. I don't know, Senator Jarvis, you may have some numbers on that, but that's a lot of money because of the timetable that we were dealing with process over swinging hammers and putting boots on the ground. So what went wrong? Again, process over outcome. The big question is why? Why did this happen? Where did INCOR mess up? Well, you know, you really can't confuse process with outcomes, and this is one of the things that we got from our expert, and I agreed with it. Without defined criteria, you're paying for process. We spent a tremendous amount of time on process, and really the job was swinging hammers. 4 key findings outline the failure. Finding number 1 is a poor budgeting process. And I'm not going to just point fingers at INCOR. I've been in this job now 10.5 months, and this is not necessarily an isolated incident on poor budgeting processes. But I will say this organization was set up for the sole purpose of dealing with this. So there should have been a tighter budgeting process because they knew going in that they were going to have to deal with a budget. The poor budgeting process, you know, one of the things we looked at, they dealt with 3 different software systems to keep up with their money, and this is where we ran into a problem in terms of trying to really give a financial statement audit that we could certify as correct, because the North Carolina financial system, the disaster recovery grant reporting system, which is a federal system, and then INCOR set up a system where they employed the use of Salesforce as a program. None of these numbers reconciled when our team looked at it. So each system had a different number. Now, in order to give you a certified through our office look at a financial system, we're going to have to go back and rebuild those systems. It's going to take a lot of money, a lot of time, and I'll do it. I just don't know that it's going to be a productive use of our office's time. But I will tell you that when we did test some of these, we sampled 22% of recorded payments involving 25 different vendors and found that 9 of the vendors had invoices amounts that differed greater than 1% between each of the 3 financial systems. One example was a Courtyard by Marriott we just randomly pulled out that had 129% difference in the payments that went out. Now, if you can't keep those payments consistent, you're not going to be able to give a full report without going invoice by invoice, date by date with every single vendor. And I'm going to go back to that in a minute. Comparing North Carolina financial system numbers with what was submitted to HUD in its quarterly performance reports, there was a $27.5 million difference in expenses reported. I would point out, and a lot of this goes to the initial setup. And again, I'm not trying to pour and heap on the compliments to Director Gibson, but I will say, in his defense, he didn't set this up. But on the Salesforce program, we have it illustrated in our report. They spent $25.4 million on that program, and that program cannot deliver. And I did, Director Gibson and I have had a good relationship, I think, and we've worked really well together. We actually talked this week, and I asked for a specific report, and his team couldn't do it with the Salesforce program. And quite frankly, I mean, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, but for $25.4 million, that program ought to do somersaults, and it ought to be the star of a Cirque du Soleil program. I mean, that's a lot of money to spend on a program. And that goes to another thing that I've seen across state government. I think this exists in private industry as well, at least in my experience, is technology is a great thing, but it's just a tool. We've got to be able to use the tool, set it up. A lot of the inability for the team to be able to make Salesforce work, it's not the computer program itself, it's the inability to get it to do what we want it to do. There's no standard operating procedure on how to use that particular program even after it was set up. So when you have turnover in your organization, you have folks that are left with having to figure it out. And that's a systematic problem. So the technology does not land on the table and fix everything. You still have to have humans engaged to make that technology productively work. So a key finding number 2 was the poor data quality, and that goes to the design and implementation of the Salesforce platform. I mentioned the $25.4 million. I would say even after this body was generous enough to pass the DAVE Act, which gave us an additional $6 million in resources to work on efficiency matters across the state of North Carolina, $25.4 million represents approximately the state appropriation to the entire state auditor's office on an annual basis. So that helps you put that number into perspective. Sometimes these numbers can get kind of big. Numerous test applications could not be properly identified or removed. There were inconsistent blank fields within records, negative processing times, that shouldn't exist, applications marked as complete without corresponding end dates, and missing notice to proceed dates. So there was a lot of poor data. One of the things that we see in our university systems, for example, and I mentioned at the beginning of this, and it's one of the reasons why I mentioned it, is with East Carolina University, we completed our financial statement audit of East Carolina University. Our universities do a really good job across the system of keeping up with the numbers and making those numbers auditable so that they can report. They also have boards of trustees and a board of governors, as well as the legislature that oversees those budgets, right? And so that, I think, is another key point, and I'll get to that in our recommendations as we move forward. But another finding on poor data quality is With more than 11,000 applications processed through Salesforce, of those, 3,400 were marked as complete in the system, but only 771 had an end date for the project. 4 applications that were marked ineligible in the system had invoices ranging from $1,500 to more than $130,000 in total. These invoices cost HRP over $211,000. It's not the program, it was the way it was used and designed, and our team concluded it was a lack of a standard operating procedure that was left in place to use that program. Key finding number 3, insufficient budget controls and monitoring. Insufficient budget controls and lack of ongoing financial monitoring contributed to fiscal uncertainty and the need for emergency funding. This is why INCOR came to the legislature. Instead of following a structured financial roadmap, the management and staff operated reactively. Interviews with INCOR's CFO and budget director confirmed that the budget monitoring was minimal and focused on technical accounting rather than strategic oversight. And when the two don't go together, what you have is a situation where the mindset was, if there's no money left, then we'll just close the program. As of April 25, INCOR's Salesforce system recorded payments to vendors under the HRP totaling $784.7 million. And you saw that there were discrepancies between the 3 programs. It indicates that nearly $785 million in public funds was dispersed to vendors without a single reconciled source of financial truth or robust oversight. So the payments made were never reconciled together. And we see that across government in a lot of municipalities as well. Where you have staff that's not up to date. And again, these programs, you can get overwhelmed pretty quick, but we still need to keep the budget straight, and we'll get to that in recommendations. But key finding number 4 was inadequate oversight of vendors, and we talked about that. I'm not going to belabor that point. A lot of that is a result, I talked about the fact that of needing to cooperate between vendors and government, and you cannot outsource governance. I don't want to belabor that point. I'm glad to take questions on that as well. But let's go to the recommendations page. Long-term recommendations. Again, this is what I really want to focus on because I think this is where we can be productive as the state auditor's office and where we can help and instruct with the legislature's cooperation and other executive branch help. We recommend establishing a partnership for disaster recovery. State of North Carolina has a council of state. We have 10 statewide executives who are elected statewide by the people. Along with the Department of Public Safety, we should work with the General Assembly, with this body, on appropriate changes to establish a sustainable vision for long-term disaster recovery. We suggest some, we just kind of made that up, SOLID, SOLID, sustainable outcomes for long-term impact and disaster recovery. We're not married to that. The idea is simple. We rightfully spend millions of dollars and tens of thousands of hours on first responders, and we should. And I've told this body that before, and I'm going to repeat it. We absolutely should. That's government's job because, when the waters come, we want swiftwater rescue teams to be able to get people out of harm's way. We want police to show up. We want the firemen to show up. We want folks to be able to be rescued. I know we've got some emergency management folks here. The response part of a disaster is part 1. Part 2 is recovery. There is a difference between recovery and response. What we don't do is we don't spend $1 or a single hour in long-term training or funding of what I call the back end of the house, which is the financial accounting and accountability of where we're spending these billions of dollars in recovery. In our opinion, the time is now to establish a sustainable long-term way to account and manage the recovery process. And we've been fortunate this year to not be affected by a major hurricane or disaster. Now, there are disasters that happen, there are incidents, but not a big, and we had some with the nor'easter down the East Coast, on our coast, we had some pretty severe damage on our coast, but it wasn't, a Florence or a Matthew or a Helene type incident. This gives us a window of opportunity to really get to work on this. And I know it's boring and I know it's not a lot of fun, but the accounting is important because you want, as policymakers and appropriators, you want to have confidence and you want the public to have trust in the money that you are appropriating, that money is going to go to get actual results. The best way to do that is to set this up on the front end as a sustainable system. I have not, in full disclosure, and our office has not taken a deep dive look at NC Grow yet. We are tracking Helene funding. It's unfair to go in and audit a program that's been stood up for a year. I'm not an unfair person. We are tracking those dollars, and this body put the governor on sort of a shot clock to give us information, and they do. As they expend money, we get that money, and we're putting that up in our data tracker. That's helping us in a couple of ways. One, it's helping with the transparency, and that dashboard gets more and more robust over the weeks because our systems get more and more robust. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get that thing down to the receipt level, and in some instances it already is down to the receipt level. But that is a first step. It also gives us the data ahead of time, so now we're not having to recreate this data. We've got it, right? So we're not having to go back down the road and capture this data. It was a strategic move to go ahead and be able to capture that data on the front end so that we can give folks report. And so we did do a test run on that, and this body is aware, and I'm going to go to the Swannanoa report that we did as a rapid response report on the showers, bathroom, and laundry facility in Swannanoa, North Carolina. And that report detailed, and we wanted to see if our computer system could do what we thought it could do. And so we did it as a test, and it is successful. In the old days, and I can say in the old days, 6 months ago, you would print out the invoices and lay them out on the conference table and try to piece them together. We don't have to do that anymore. We've got really good computer systems that are helping us. They're not a panacea. Again, it's not a technology where you can just snap your finger and these computers are going to get it done. We've worked really hard to make those systems more robust over the last 4 or 5 months. We've also taken our time with cybersecurity efforts so that when we have to take in data that has personal identifying information, we are confident in the security of our systems. But I'll talk to the Swannanoa report. That report showed, and this goes to Director Fugate and some of the lessons that we took from him on the difference between response and recovery, and to governance, government being in the governance business. To provide showers, bathrooms, and laundry facilities and a respite tent costs the taxpayer $145,000 a day. And that did not include the management personnel to manage. The actual cost is more than that. Now, in the response mode, when people are in harm's way, when they've lost their home, when they've lost their business, there is no running water, the cost is immaterial. And that's pretty much should be the rule. When we need to get to stabilization, cost is immaterial. Where governance comes in to the equation is when we transition from response to recovery. There has to be active management. And that, I think, is the lesson of that report. Because at some point, you have to start ratcheting down your response. Director Fugate used a hypothetical example. If you had, for example, an island off the coast of North Carolina and some folks decided to stay on that island, or they were caught by surprise of the strength of the storm, and they were cut off from all provisions and you needed to get them water and food, And the only way to do it was by a Chinook helicopter. And the Chinook helicopter, for example, might cost $7,000 a load for water. If that's what it costs, well, that's what it costs. We got to get those folks water and food, and we got to stabilize that situation. But within a period of time, you're going to be able to build a floating bridge, or you're going to have some way to be able to access that particular location in a more efficient and more economical way, where you're not going to have to continually spend $7,000 a helicopter ride to drop water. Same is true from that Swannanoa report. By Christmas, the water was running in Asheville. I know that because I was there. There was a less expensive way to do it. There was a way to ratchet it down. And I'm not, it's a policy decision to make to spend $145,000 a day on that facility. And it costs a lot of money because you had to truck water in and then you had to truck wastewater out. And if that's the policy decision of the executive branch to make, well, that's the policy decision of the executive branch to make. That's not my decision to tell, but I will say it could have been done efficiently at a point in time, and there was a lack of active management because it was 2 weeks after we showed up to kick the tires that they actually closed the camp down. And quite frankly, I don't think that was just a coincidence. So, and that's not to say it was a bad decision. Our report, by the way, did not say it was a bad decision. It just said this is how much it costs. And when you're actively managing a disaster, you have to manage when we move from response to recovery. Okay? And this is an example of why there needs to be a partnership between all levels of government. The governor in our last Council of State meeting actually went around the table and pointed out how each member of the Council of State had assisted and is continuing to assist with the recovery in Western North Carolina. And look, I signed up to run because I wanted to serve the people of North Carolina, and I believe that every other member of the Council of State did it for the same reason. There's no reason why the Council of State shouldn't be able to get together with the legislature and with relevant departments to come up with a way to move forward with an accountability system so that each one of you and your body, because it's you run the policy of the state of North Carolina and you appropriate hard-earned taxpayer money across the state of North Carolina, you need to have confidence that the money is being spent efficiently and appropriately, and the only way to do that is to bring all the stakeholders to the table, in my opinion, and in our team's opinion. That has to be job one, and I really do believe that. That leads to the need for a budget plan, policies and procedures to monitor that budget. All of that flows from a singular system, and it doesn't have to be an agency that you stand up. When we have an emergency on the first responder side, you do have emergency management. They're there. What they do is they bring in the local folks from the area that's going to be affected, because the local folks know where the best shelters are. They know what roads are probably going to flood. They know the best ingress and egress. We can do the same on the financial side of the house. There are experts across this state on filling out FEMA forms in our municipalities and in our counties. There are experts on budgetary matters. You've got an auditor right there, Auditor Coletti. He's an expert in a lot of this as well, right? There are experts across the state. We don't necessarily have to have a standing organization where we pour a lot of money, but we ought to have a training and we ought to have a computer system in today's world that we all know how to run, that's got a standard operating procedure. And I suggested this yesterday. We ought to start with the $25 million one we've already bought and try to make that work moving forward, right? And let's get folks trained up, and when a disaster hits, you bring the back end of the house into Raleigh or wherever they need to be. At the same time, you bring the front end of the house in. The front end, using that restaurant analogy, the front end of the house, that's your first responders. The back end of the house, that's the accountants. That's the people with the number 2 pencils. Okay? You bring them into the house and you get it set up from the very beginning, and that way you know where the money's going. Contract management, we got to do a better job. I've mentioned it. You can see the boxes here. We got to streamline that, and we got to provide uniform metrics for contractors so that neither Encore or the contractor gets the blame. That the government and the private contractors who we've invited into the state of North Carolina to assist us work with as a partnership, and there are reasonable expectations from both ends of that contract. So that contract management, very key. I will add that is key across the state of North Carolina, and I think, I know you can expect from our office future reports, information on contracts across the state of North Carolina. But with this respect, we've got to start it up from the very beginning. And then the data integrity and reporting, and that again goes back to long-term recommendation number one. We have to be able to set up one way to do this, because what happens now, I said this already in one committee, and many of you may remember it. Look, we just set up an ad hoc program every time there's a disaster. And you already mentioned it, Chair Gillespie, that Grow NC has been set up in response to Helene. Well, we also already had Encore. Right? So now we've got two of these programs going at the same time. If we had another disaster, I don't think anybody in this room really wants to see a third organization set up on an ad hoc basis to address a storm in eastern North Carolina, were we to get one here in the next few weeks. I mean, I guess November ends hurricane season, but I've seen them come late, right? Representative Willingham. And why is recovery important? And I'm looking at Representative Willingham, and I think he knows where I'm going with this. It's important because of 1999, and that is Hurricane Floyd. And it's important because of where Princeville sits today, and the fact that the town of Speed no longer exists as of a month ago. And in large part, those communities don't exist because the recovery was not even as robust as it has been with Encore, because Encore hasn't done everything wrong. They have actually done some stuff to help revitalize these communities, and we are working really hard. And I know, Senator Mayfield, you know this in Western North Carolina, that is the focus of the current administration, and I would support that focus. If you don't have businesses rebuilt, people are going to move because they don't have anywhere to go to work. And that's what happened in Speed, and that's what's happened in Princeville. I think I'm correct in saying that, Representative Willingham, and there are other communities in that 1999 floodplain of Floyd where we've seen communities never recovered because there was not a focus on that recovery process. That's why a unified program that is focused not only on rebuild and on homes and getting people back into their homes, helping them understand the process, being swift, getting folks back into a stable living condition quickly, but also a focus on businesses and how that affects the economy of the region so that those regions don't die and people don't move to Raleigh and Charlotte out of eastern North Carolina. I mean, it's fine if that's what they want to do, but they shouldn't be forced to do it. They should be able to live in the communities where they reside and be able to continue to work there if the state can help. And we've shown that we've got resources to be able to do this. We just need to marshal them more efficiently. Now, I'd love to be here with a full GAO certified audit on your financial statement. Again, that was our initial goal. So what are we going to do now? One of the things that we're going to do is work with businesses, and you can see those. We did list them. You can go all the way to the end of our audit. No reason necessarily to look at it today, but it's Appendix H. We do list the businesses that received dollars from Encore. We're going to work with those vendors over the next several months in a partnership cooperatively to find out how they used state DAX dollars in response. That is a really good way for us to be able to gauge efficient use of dollars by going to the folks that actually got paid and find out exactly how they used them, how they spent money on lumber, how did they supply lumber, how did they supply nails, how did they manage their workforce with respect to having to stay in the workforce themselves, having to stay in hotels or campers. That type of logistics is going to be really important. So the legislation that you guys envisioned us to do is to continue this work. So we are going to do that from the vendor point of view, because also we want to know from the vendor where the state can be more cooperative, because again, that's a two-way contract. These folks are not, as I said, these contractors are not knocking on the door saying, hey, I want to fix your roof. We've invited them in, right? So we've got an obligation as well to work with them to make sure that if we're going to contract with them and we're asking them to provide a service, we need to make sure that we're making it efficient for them to get the job done, because we don't want to be the problem, right? We want to actually make sure this gets done. So that is our next step. We are going to recreate as much of that financial picture as possible. But again, these are sunk costs, and I am about efficiency, and I don't see the reason to spend $1 million to $2 million state tax dollars to get down to the penny financial statement unless this body wants to spend the money. I'm not asking you to. But what we can do is go to the vendors and work with them and work backwards from what they received from their point of view. And I do think that is a responsible thing to do, and that is our next step. So I am open to any question. Again, glad to answer any question, concerns that you may have. I'm confident in our numbers, and I'm confident in the work that we've done, and I do want to end. I've complimented him twice, so I'll make it 3 times the charm. I do want to compliment and thank Director Gibson and his team for their work. I've met with him several times, and they have really begun a process, I think, to answer this body's request to get the job done. Again, there were problems, and there continue to be problems, but you can see from the data, once the governance was taken over by NCOR, things got better really quickly. And once Director Gibson took over in the fall, and there was a fire lit with additional state dollars, the production increased quite rapidly. So I'm not here to throw Molotov cocktails. I'm here to tell you the facts, and those are the facts, and they deserve credit on that, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock, for that. Before we open up the questions, I'll make just a brief comment. This body appreciates the work that your office does, appreciates the effort and the enthusiasm that you provide to that office. More importantly, we appreciate the context of the reports that you provide, that they're a usable tool that we can use moving forward. And you referenced this earlier, and I want to just circle back to it because I think we agree on this. It's not just you. It's the staff that you have, the staff members that you have sitting here. But I'd ask you respectfully to let your staff know wherever they're at that's worked on this, that the General Assembly appreciates their efforts and appreciates their work, because it has not gone unnoticed.
I appreciate that. They are good. I expected, quite frankly, to walk into the office on January 2nd and have about 60 resignations on my letter. I don't know why I expected that. I guess I was just insecure. But that didn't happen. In fact, we've got a really, really good professional team of professional civil servants who they could care less who the elected state auditor is, as long as they've got a mission and they've got a purpose and they've got work to do on behalf of the people of North Carolina. And Vernon Utley, to my left and to your right, is a really good example of somebody who is not only a high-functioning professional who knows what the heck is going on, he's dedicated to the job.
Thank you. We'll open up to questions. Ms. Williams?
I think you probably mentioned this, but prior to NCOR and CDBG, the funds were facilitated by Commerce, that the administration of these funds, Commerce were administering these funds. My question is, do you think that projects of this scope, because we're talking about building a lot of new houses and repairing houses, but do you think of projects like this scope is something where we might need to involve a lot of, well, I guess project managers to oversee, to have some, we're talking about oversight and also having some responsibility. And so by providing project managers for these areas might be the thing that might help us with that.
I'm going to let Deputy Utley answer that because he knows a lot about project management, and then I'll follow up.
Thank you for your question. Yes, project management is critical on the front end of disaster recovery and response efforts, because one of the things that we learned in the meeting with INCOR is that there was no comprehensive assessment of the total damage. The way they proceeded is once someone submitted an application and they were deemed eligible, they funded that particular individual's home project and they moved on to the next one. So the risk with that is they deferred knowing the total cost because they didn't know how much the total assessment was until the end of the application period. And that's where Auditor Bolick is talking about the front end strategic planning, being strategic.
I will say, Representative Williams, my understanding is that the current Helene effort, while Grow NC does exist, Commerce is leading a lot of that effort in terms of the rebuild program. It's housed under Commerce. Again, that answers that begs the question: what's NC Grow doing if Commerce is running the rebuild? But I don't think there's a fault one way or the other. I think what happens is these disasters happen, and this body appropriates dollars, and the executive branch is just ad hoc sets up a way to get it done. There's nothing nefarious there. That's just trying to get the job done. We don't have a unified program. I do think this idea of having the same type of setup for the recovery process that we have for initial response is a good way to go. And again, I don't think we have to stand up another agency. I think you can house it within an agency, you can house it within an office, and then when the disaster happens, you flip the switch and bring in the experts to make sure that we're set up to go.
Follow up. This begs the question, is it possible for your office to start providing training for those persons who are going to be working disaster recovery or relief? I mean, have people already trained in-house who could do some of these things that we many times, we go outside to get outside experts where we can get the process rolling right away rather than waiting. We go through that contracting process of trying to get people to come in and do work.
Yeah, it is possible for us to do that. We would, in order to do that, so the auditor's office, and I'm not going to bore you with the history of the auditor's office, but the auditor's office duties and responsibilities have changed drastically over the years. The auditor's initial job was to actually write the checks. They were the controller. That's what the auditor did. So this job has, this office itself has changed over the years. Primarily in my predecessor's time, it was mostly focused on the financial statement audits and as an accounting firm. And I have been very open about my wanting to broaden that mission toward government efficiency and performance audits. And so we could do that. We would have to set that up as a separate sort of area because we've got to maintain our objectivity on the audit side of the house, but we certainly could do that if this body wanted us to do that. again, I think it would be a great idea to involve the other elected officials across the state of North Carolina in that process, as well as this body, so that we're all kind of on the same page. I would hate to not be on the same page. There are a lot of bright people in the North Carolina General Assembly, all of you included. There are also a lot of bright people on the Council of State. And together, I think we can really form, again, I know this is boring stuff. This is not going out and getting to rescue people. This is the back end of the house and accounting, but I think it's so vitally important that we get it right and that we get this project management, to your point, Representative Willingham, right, that we've got to really focus on it. That we could do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bolick, for being here and for all the work your team did on this. I mean, I think that was really, and your real focus on how we can do this better going forward, because obviously as somebody from a Helene hit area, that's really important and something that I'm really focused on. I'm looking at this audit, and obviously it was directed by Senate Bill 382, Session Law 2024-57. Was supposed to be done by July 1st, 2025. I think you've spoken to the challenges there, but it said the state auditor shall conduct a financial and performance audit of the office no later than July 1st, 2025. And, so just would like to understand sort of what the challenges were, and I think you've gone over some of those. And in the end, the limitations on page 29 of the report say this assessment was not conducted as an audit under government auditing standards. And so just wondered what communication there was kind of between the General Assembly and the Auditor's Office in the lead up to this time. Obviously, I'm in the minority. I didn't hear any of that communication, but would like to know kind of what that discussion was like.
Yeah, glad to. First, I'm not going to appear in front of a committee or give the people something that I can't raise my right hand and know is correct. Number one. That's number one. Number two, we brought in some outside help on this because, again, I walked into an office that had 40 openings. Now, I want to talk about that. I reformed an administrative position as a recruiter, and by June we had filled all those 40 positions. So we have gotten up to staff, and we're down to only, I think, 20 openings now on the last 45 positions that this body gave us, maybe 21 openings. So we did bring in outside experts, and they said it's the worst government accounting system they had ever run into. And that was, and I can let Deputy Utley speak to that. If you want another member, not an elected politician, to tell you who is a civil servant, that's what we ran into. And we wanted to be able to deliver something. And so we did have it scheduled, I think, 2 or 3 times to come before this committee because we wanted to be responsive to the legislature. And I told my chief of staff I'm not comfortable releasing anything. And so I'll take the hit on that, but I'll take the hit because I wanted to be able to deliver a product that was relevant and had some information. And as I said, our next steps are to answer a lot of the questions. And the best way that we feel strategically that we can do it within our own budget without having to come to the legislature and ask for additional funds, which we're not going to have to do, is to go to the contractors, the vendors who actually received money on behalf of the taxpayer, and work with them to know exactly how they spent the money. And we do have authority under our office to get that information, but I have no reason to believe that we won't be able to work cooperatively with vendors, because the goal also is not to point fingers at a vendor. The goal is to get a true picture so that moving forward we have that reasonable expectation on both sides of the contract. So the reason it would take another $1 million estimated by our team to give you a GAO compliant audit. I'm just not willing to spend the taxpayer money to do that. What we did do is on our special reports, and look, I'm not the only auditor in the United States that does special reports. This is an ongoing trend among auditors across the United States. And the reason is because the standards set under the GAA audit, while they're really good, and we certainly comply with those most technically on the financial statement audits, because those financial statement audits are used for the AAA credit rating of the state of North Carolina, and they're used to give business and industry, when they move here, confidence in the financial viability of our state and the management overall of our state. So we comply stringently there on those financial audits. You know, other auditors across the nation, if you comply on some of these things to a full GAO standard, you're sometimes a year to 2 years down the road. And you can go to our website and look at some of the audits, and you're a year or 2 years down the road on actually getting the information. It becomes not relevant. So what we did in our office is, and so I appreciate the question, because it allows me to talk about our team. We set up a risk management committee within our office, led by the professional staff. And we set up 3 levels of what I call QA, quality assurance, to go through, so that when we do release something, we're as 100% as we can be. Nothing's 100%, but that we're very confident in the numbers and the information that we give to not only the public but to this body. So while we did not do it through a GAO process, we sent it through our own quality assurance process within our office, which is pretty doggone good, because I've got a broad spectrum of people in our office that review this, and we want to be timely. That's why these special reports are being used across the country. Again, I'm not the only auditor doing this, because we want to be relevant. If I'm giving this in-core audit to you guys in a year or 2 years from now, whatever, right? We want to be relevant, because it also informs what we're going to try to do with Helene, right? It informs this body on some accountability measures with respect to Helene. And also, I want to point out that as a result, you know, we've taken the approach of being positive with our audit report. While we have to have evidence of why we have recommendations moving forward, this is not a point of finger audit. This is a what can we do moving forward. And I would point back to a GAO compliant audit, which was the DMV audit. We did do that through GAO requirements, and the DMV had better numbers. They had more accessible numbers. Our state agency, DOT, does a pretty good job of keeping up, but they're also held accountable on a regular basis, all right, which is something I would recommend. You know, I spent, as you know, as chair of the board at UNC Chapel Hill, so I have a lot of experience having career budget folks, chancellors come in front of a board to show their budget, show their work, and get approval. I led the effort to get boards of trustees the authority to approve budgets. And as you know, you've heard my story, we cleaned up a $100 million structural deficit at UNC Chapel Hill because of oversight. And I would recommend moving forward that there be some type of oversight in, if this body and if the executive branch goes along with our recommendation to provide a unified way of dealing with this, there ought to be an oversight component, whether it's a subcommittee of this body or whether it is a board or whether it's to the Council of State itself. I mean, we need something to do during those meetings anyway. Have y'all seen those meetings? We get done in 15 minutes. Wouldn't be unheard of to maybe have the Council of State say grace over the numbers. Because what that does is that puts the bureaucratic agency on the spot to have something done by a deadline, and they have to get their budgets right. And when you hold government accountable, they can do a really good job. You just got to hold them accountable. So I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, I'm glad to keep going.
Absolutely. And just one more quick one, if that's all right, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
And I just want to move on. I really appreciate that, because that's something, as a long-term military guy, accountability is something that I really believe in. And so just want to move on to this solid, idea that you guys have put out there for
To that. We just threw that
Sure,
out there,
yeah,
of course.
no, I mean, acronyms are fun to play with. So, but
They got a bunch of them. I made my team spell them out because I don't keep them straight.
yeah, we love acronyms in government, I suppose. But really just looking at at this program and want to understand from you sort of how you envision it working, and that would be something that this body would set up, I imagine. But the challenge to me is that you've always got to balance that needed accountability and authority being in sort of one place, while so you don't want to diffuse that accountability and authority too much by creating something like this where everybody's got a little bit of the authority and then nobody really does anything. And so just wondered how you sort of envision that working.
Yeah, I mean, the chief executive of the state is the governor. And so ultimately, when this body appropriates money to get something done, unless it's narrowly scoped, like, for example, the duties and responsibilities of the state auditor's office, that responsibility falls to the governor and the governor's office. The governor is the chief executive of the state of North Carolina. What we envision is leveraging and utilizing the expertise across the other constitutionally elected offices. Our office, as Representative Willingham pointed out, we have expertise. The Labor Commissioner has expertise, Commissioner Farley, on safety and the protocol on how things should work with respect to making sure that our workforce is safe, for example, and that we follow all the relevant labor laws. Commissioner of Insurance, Causey, he's on the front line of these insurance issues and can help, and does. As a matter of fact, when the incident in Chapel Hill happened, I noticed that he set up a mobile unit there to assist people, right? And so it makes no sense not to involve the insurance commissioner and his resources in a disaster overall program. The Secretary of State verifies the credibility and licensure of all businesses that would be involved in any type of recovery effort, any vendor. The Attorney General approves contracts. I've got a contract with him right now, for example, on a lease. We've got the biggest law firm in the state. I mean, they have a lot of expertise on this contracting issue and on metrics. So they see a lot of contracts. We've got a lot of expertise that we should be able to leverage out of the Attorney General's office. The Department of Public Instruction, crucial on recovery efforts, because when you have schools that are wiped out, for example, and they're crucial on the response end in terms of shelters and really being able to marshal those resources across the state. The treasurer, right now the treasurer is administering a multi-100 plus $200 million loan program as part of Helene recovery. Now that was given to him, but there was not an overall plan of how these pieces are going to fit together, and I think he's doing a fantastic job. Commissioner of Agriculture in charge of a lot of money that's being deployed for agricultural processes across the state of North Carolina. Of course, the Lieutenant Governor deals with this body and the North Carolina Senate as an executive, and the governor is executing overall recovery through NC GROW in Helene and through the Department of Commerce, and we talked about that briefly with Helene right now. And our office, we took it upon ourselves to go ahead and start tracking this money as a true watchdog. And ultimately, we perform special reports and audits of the money to make sure that the money is spent responsibly. And then you have the state controller, who we put in there. That's the check writer for the state. That's your state checkbook. The controller needs to know, we probably should put in Office of Budget Management, we ought to code this stuff correctly. Right? We ought to create I know I hate to say create something, but we ought to have a set of codes for disaster relief. So you can punch it into the Salesforce program that I recommend we keep using, $25 million worth. We punch those codes in and you can push the report and boom, it's there. And then we can put it on the web for the public to see exactly how their money is being spent. That doesn't seem to me to be too hard. I'm sure it's harder than I'm making it out to be, but we ought to really try, because I do think it would prevent having to have Director Gibson come in front of the committee and the auditor do this report. Every time we have a report, we can give a really good report about all the people in parts of North Carolina that we help and talk about how efficient the money was spent. That's the ultimate goal. So I would say one thing you could do is just make sure that there is a coordinated effort so that all the parties kind of are in the room when the decisions are made, so that the Ag Commissioner's not setting up his program over here and duplicating efforts that the governor may be doing, and the treasurer's not duplicating efforts that the Ag Department is doing, and that we're not setting up a tracker and then NC Grow sets up another tracker, and now we got two computer trackers. It ought to be unified, and I'm willing to help with that as much as we can from the state auditor's office. I don't have all the answers, but I do think that our team is on point with bringing these groups together. After all, as executives, I did sign up. I signed up for the job. And I'm willing to help.
I
You put
appreciate
me
that.
on the spot if you want to.
No, that makes good sense. I appreciate it.
Senator Jarvis?
Okay. Basically, the grant process. If I understand correctly, it took 2.5 years for the grant process to be basically determined whether that grant was acceptable. Could you dig a little deeper into that? Is that because of processes that were set in place by the state, by NCOR? Who set the processes in place? What was the breakdown? Why was that time frame so dramatic?
Yeah, I'm going to let Deputy Utley go to that, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, thank you for the question. What we learned when we were talking to NCOR staff and understanding their process is that a lot of times the homeowners didn't have all the information they needed.
Let me interrupt you just a second. You did not take an oath, so I think we need to do that right quick, just so we'll be illegal. If you would, raise your right hand. Thank you. Do you affirm that your testimony is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Please continue.
Thank you. Well, so when we were gaining an understanding of the eligibility process, what we learned is a lot of the homeowners didn't have the right information when they were submitting their application. So there was a lot of back and forth time, and there was really that outreach. There should have been more of an outreach, making sure that the homeowners were educated on the information that they needed to bring to be able to determine eligibility a lot sooner. So that's kind of a lot of the reasons that we learned for the delays.
So apparently nobody went out and met with the homeowner to walk them through the process.
Yes, sir.
That's correct. And there were obviously 8 steps to this process.
Right.
And again, we were in a situation where we have an organization. I would go back to the more of a, and I hate to do this, but I'll go back to more of the big picture. We're standing up an organization ad hoc to address a disaster. So it's kind of OJT, right? We're on the job training these folks. And so there's not a lot of inherited knowledge on the problems, and there's not this from a state auditor's office and the work that Director Gibson has done in the last 12 months now in terms of follow-up and keeping records and taking notes on exactly what these problems are. Now, that's not to say there won't be problems in the future. There probably will be. But again, we don't have, I've looked, we do not have a unified response on the back end of the house. We just don't. It's ad hoc. We throw money at it and we do the best we can. But there's, again, I don't want to belabor it, but I just went around. You won't go around the council estate table. Each one of the members of the council estate is doing a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there. But at no time was I ever called into a meeting to make sure that we weren't duplicating efforts, for example, right? I think that's a good step right there.
So another thing, looking at the sales force, where do you identify the data breakdown? Was that Salesforce's problem? Was that the initial meeting to set the system up? I just came back 2 weeks ago and toured Salesforce. They have an amazing product, but you've got to know what to ask to build the program for the way that it needs to be built. And I think moving forward, and I'm trying to read between the lines, we need all the council of states at the table. We need to move forward. We need to not move forward until we build this system that incorporates all the financial data, all the contract date, all the contracts. I believe everything could be in a format in which that could be operated, and it could operate seamlessly and expeditiously. Am I missing something?
You're not, Senator. It's not the program. It's not Salesforce. It's the way it was set up. And again, and I'll go off topic a little bit, but it's like in North Carolina, we've got a lot of legacy data systems. That's going to be an issue moving forward for our state. We identified one already through our audit of DMV. That is a legacy data system. I can tell you, since July, our office has been charged with the financial management and budgeting of the State Board of Elections, and we have a voter database and an election system that was built in 1998. It's time to modernize that system. And this committee is aware of that. In response to that, for example, our office and the State Board of Elections issued what's called our RFI, Request for Information, because we want to hear from every single stakeholder, regardless of your position as a stakeholder, whether you're a legislator, whether you're somebody who's enthusiastic about elections, whether you're just a citizen or whether you're a vendor. We want to know what a modern system should look like and what it should comply with. We see across the state our information systems, and I'm going to let Vernon talk to this in detail because, you know, he was promoted to the chief deputy or a deputy over performance audits, but he was leading our information systems audit team, so he's got a lot of experience auditing information systems across the state of North Carolina. And what we have is it's hand in glove not only on user interface, but it goes to these 5 boxes to my left, which are the contractual arrangements and the RFP that gets put out to a software vendor on exactly what you're asking for. Because if you get into a middle of a contract on setting up a computer program, and then halfway through the deal, you've gotten a contract, you've gone through an RFP process, taken in a bunch of bids, and you've got this software vendor, and you tell them you got to make changes. Well, now you're really over the barrel, so to speak, because you've got no choice but to deal with that vendor to make those changes and get an amendment to the contract to add to the scope of work, and that's where you start getting into the real gazintas. That's where the money starts adding up. And so we've got to be really good with our contract building, but I want Vernon to talk a lot because he has a lot of expertise on this.
Yes. And yes, exactly what Auditor Bola has discussed, and as we call it in the IT project management, is understanding your functional and technical requirements. So talking to those key stakeholders and with the vendors, having an expectation of what we need the system to do and limiting the assumptions. A lot of times we see there are a lot of assumptions that are listed in these contracts, and those assumptions turn into change orders later, which drive up the cost. So again, it's on the front end, understanding those requirements up front before you even get in contract with the vendor, so you can properly vet the system.
One additional follow-up. In looking at everything, this is only one agency that we're looking at, and there was 3 financial data, different systems, different software systems that were used.
Yeah, well, they were using the comptroller system as well as the federal system and the Salesforce system, and they used Excel spreadsheets as well.
Do we, and this is a bigger thing, but do we have this across the entire state? We need to get simplified to where we have a data system that all talks the same language back and forth. If we don't have a central system that is integrated with all of our systems, we're spending tremendously more money by this department sets their own system up, this one sets their own system up. There may be certain entities that have to have a separate system that has to talk back and forth, but we have to be centralized. And in moving forward, I hope that we put everybody in the room and move this system forward to where we can have a disaster relief program that we know works. How many years have we had disasters in the state of North Carolina? Never to the extreme that we have in the past decade. But we know that we're going to continue to be hit with more. We need something that works and works effectively and works immediately. And I would like to see more detailed data on how to move forward to make that happen.
I appreciate that, Senator, and that is our goal with respect to dealing with the vendors. I think the strategically within our office, we've designed the idea that we need to go to the actual folks that we're paying to see how those payments were delivered, how the invoices were delivered to Encore, what that mechanically looks like. I mean, it's one thing for us to sit here and talk about it. It's another thing to sit in the actual accounting office of a vendor and go through their process. That will inform us really well on the technical end in terms of being able to deliver you, as you envisioned in the legislation, a follow-up with respect to how this should work and how it can work more effectively and efficiently. But again, there's got to be work between the state and the vendor. It's not all the vendor's responsibility, and it's not all the state's responsibility. There has to be cooperation, and there have to be reasonable expectations.
Senator Bayfield.
Thank you. And are we trying to finish up by noon? Okay, I will be quick. A number of other folks have asked questions that were on my list too. So first of all, I appreciate your report and the recommendations, and you certainly do seem to be approaching this in a very non-political way, and maybe non-partisan way is a better way to say it, and I certainly appreciate that. I also agree with the recommendation that, and what my colleague here has said, that we could do a better job of standing up an entity, a program, a system, whatever it is, to better respond to ongoing disaster so that we're not doing it for the first time every single time. And I also agree with you that Council of State agencies have key roles to play. And obviously we're not going to work that structure out right now, but ultimately the buck has to stop somewhere. And my concern is that if you spread it out, I have two concerns. Number one, if you spread it out kind of among those agencies, even if they're working in concert, the question is, it's going to be easy to pass the buck, right? And then number two, I think we cannot ignore the political world in which we live. And that would be my big concern, is in having it housed anywhere other than the governor's office, regardless of party, is just that politics would come into play and would make it difficult and challenging. And I think Governor Stein knows that and he's committed to this. The success of his governorship significantly rests on his ability to respond appropriately and well to Helene, and I think he's doing it in spades. And if you look at the dashboard of the Renew NC program, which is the home building program for the Helene recovery, I mean, they're already closing out projects. A few just 13 months after, 14 months after. So clearly there have been a lot of lessons learned. So I guess I just say all that to say, I appreciate you putting on the table the need for the agencies to come together, and if we can somehow create a room where somehow you walk in and politics don't matter, that would be awesome. I don't know how we do that. The other thing I guess I would want to say is, and maybe this is more kind of talking about it prophylactically, you've got a quote in the report where you talk about how INCOR put administrative process ahead of boots on the ground, and you reference that now, in your testimony here today as well. And I am sure that you are not suggesting sacrificing compliance with either state or federal regulations in order to, swing hammers and get boots on the ground. And it's not clear to me, sort of the degree to which the efforts at compliance were responsible for some of the problems that you have identified in here. And that's just that is an ongoing issue, particularly compliance with the federal regulations and programs and CDB GDR stuff. And, that's clear from talking to the staff that they struggle with that every day. And they keep running into roadblocks where, FEMA and everybody else they're working with says, no, that is not the way we do it. And they have to argue for it to be done a different way to meet the needs of our recovery. So I think, again, maybe it's just, I appreciate you flagging that, but I think that's just going to be an ongoing issue under Helene and any disaster, is balancing moving forward with the work and also making sure that we're complying so that we don't get hammered and lose resources and things like that going forward. So,
So I agree with both points. Would like to clarify on that. One, I don't think you're ever going to be able to take politics out of the room. It's just not going to happen. Let's just be realistic. But I do think, as I said, I think that individuals who signed up to run for statewide office at the executive level did it for the right reason, because they want to serve the people of North Carolina. And I do want to clarify, I did say to Representative Ager's question that it should be housed with the governor's office. The governor's the chief executive, and I want to be clear. We've not done an audit or drilled down on NC GROW. Maybe NC GROW is the agency and organization that, again, looking at it from an efficiency standpoint, let's not start something brand new. If NC GROW has some good backbones, and clearly, and I've not, in full disclosure, I've not talked to Governor Stein directly about this issue. I've talked to him about a lot of issues, but not this issue. Clearly, he did not feel, as chief executive, that he had confidence in INCOR. Otherwise, he would have housed Helene in INCOR. So I think there's been a clear policy decision made by the current chief executive to move away from INCOR. So I think we should help and assist, and my team stands ready, and we will continue to help and assist Director Gibson, and we're going to continue to drill down, as I've just pledged to this body, with vendors so that we can really understand and share that knowledge with this chief executive and future chief executives so they can look back. But I'm not saying that NC GROW might not be the first good step. I do suggest, though, that there be communication, and I'm not saying to spread necessarily the responsibility, but communication of what expectations are of Council of State members, where our expertise as members of the Council of State can be best leveraged to produce results on behalf of North Carolinians. And to go back to what you said, Senator Jarvis, I was naive enough to think that when I got to be state auditor, I'd walk in and like that Severance TV show, I'd go and there'd be a terminal and I'd get the state checkbook, right? That just doesn't exist. Money's flying everywhere in this state, and we got to get a hold of it at some point. admin ahead of boots on the ground. I don't think there's ever any intention on that, and I do think that it is complex because we want to make sure that we comply. But you also just said NC Grow and Commerce has already got 13 projects out the door within a year, so it can be done. It's a question of will and effort, and where are we going to focus on the results at the end of the day. So yes, it can be done, and in this case, it wasn't.
Senator Smith, I don't want to exclude you from opportunity to ask. Do you have a brief question?
It is brief.
Thank you.
I don't know if his answer is going to be brief, but
I'm sorry.
no. I'm just saying because I heard you talking about now going and looking into the vendors. How will you identify which vendors to audit?
Yeah, I think
Because
we're
there's
going.
9 pages of them, and I'm looking at.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. I think we'll randomly choose some. We obviously want to look at those who received 8-figure sums from the state of North Carolina. I think that it's not unreasonable for us to ask those who received the most state tax dollars to account and help us to understand, even from their perspective, maybe some challenges that they had. But we will randomly select them, but I'm certainly going to look at those that received 8 figures.
Okay, thank you.
One brief question, and this is probably in your report. I haven't read it cover to cover. Did you find any evidence, and back up just a second, in the business that I'm accustomed to, when we start having problems, we start fixing it early on. We don't typically let the train jump off the track before we start figuring out what to do. Did you see any evidence that would indicate that INCOR reached out to the governor's office before the train got off the track, and indicated that, you know, we've got problems, we've got a potential problem? Did they ask for help, or did that seem to stay internally in INCOR?
We didn't find any evidence of that, but I do think, again, the data, we want to focus on the data and help the data inform sort of the answers to my question. You can see that by 2022, there was a clear shift in policy from INCOR where they took over governance of the rebuild, and you saw an increase, and that is in the report. You can see a tremendous increase in productivity once INCOR took back the governance as opposed to letting vendors govern the productivity. When INCOR took back over governance 22 moving forward, they also revamped some of the contractor contracts, and in that respect, that governance point, which is what I focused on in my comments, once INCOR took over the governance, things started to get better. And then Director Gibson took over, and over the last 12 months, we've seen an increase in productivity. But we did not see a lot of necessarily, there wasn't any evidence. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but we didn't run across a lot of evidence. And we also did not run across any evidence that there was any criminal fraud or activity involved at all. I want to be really clear about that. If there were, rest assured, I would have a law enforcement agent sitting to my right, but we did not find that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you
Mr.
for
Chair,
the presentation. I'm sorry.
Can I ask one, or can I just make one more point? And it's really a point for us. One of the reasons that Renew NC, the housing program for Helene, has moved so quickly is because we put money on the table. And let's just remember that with INCOR, the state didn't put money on the table, I think, until last year. Is that in March of this year? Anyway, we brought our money in at the end, and so what we know is that it takes time to stand up these programs. The federal dollars are slow, and I say that just as a reminder to all of us, when the next disaster happens again, it is incumbent upon us to put money into particularly the housing program as quickly as we can to get it stood up and moving forward. We can't wait on the federal dollars. We just can't. That's not to say that anything that you have figured out is not right. It is, but the money flowing also matters a lot.
And I would echo, we need to make sure we have a back end of the house that's prepared to account for those dollars on behalf of the taxpayers.
Thank you, Auditor Bullock. Mr. Gibson, if you'll come, please.
Thank you. I think most of us have a prior.
Mr. Gibbs, you would please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that your testimony is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, sir.
Thank you, sir. Senator Jackson says that 5 minutes is how long it takes you, so the floor is yours, my friend.
That'd be longer than he usually gives me. First off, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, and I want to start off, my presentation will not be very long, but I want to start off, I have to start off with, first of all, thanking the people of Eastern North Carolina, specifically the disaster victims, for their strength, their endurance, their tenacity, because Matthew and Florence happened a long time ago, and it's taken a long time to get this done. On their behalf, as an Eastern North Carolinian, I want to thank you guys for the almost $300 million you put in the program, along with the hundreds of millions that our incredible partners at HUD have done. So over $1 billion for Eastern Recovery, and a lot of folks in here would say that's not even enough. And I probably shouldn't start either, Mr. Chairman, without thanking some other folks. The local governments in North Carolina and Eastern North Carolina have been amazing. When you have a disaster like we had in Matthew and Florence, it just doesn't affect individuals, it affects their communities, and we overwhelmed the recovery. The recovery overwhelmed Eastern North Carolina infrastructure at the local government, at the community level. It was really a disaster on a lot of levels, and our local governments really stood up and continue to answer the call to get those jobs done. And the other people we can't possibly leave out are the incredible nonprofits, religious organizations, the NGOs that have stepped up. I cannot tell you how many times the Catholic Charities, the Lutheran Home, Baptist on Mission that we have a partnership with now working on some of these projects, they've been outstanding. And probably first and foremost, I should thank the NCORE staff. Last year or so has not been really easy on those folks. All the nice things that our auditor said about things that I didn't do them, they did. They're amazing staff, and we're very proud and honored to have them helping the folks in Eastern North Carolina. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll go through my slides real quick, and I'll, I'll address this meeting. Is I think our 5th or 6th meeting that we've been before you. This is my 3rd one. My first one was literally a year ago, where I was named director, and then we met, I think, in January 30, where we had a lot of talk about numbers and expectations and projections. So I'm going to go straight to there because I think that's the easiest and simplest way to address some of the things that the auditor has brought up. So what we have here on this slide, Mr. Chairman, is essentially 2 data points. This is from January of 22, where Auditor Bullock has mentioned that NCORE kind of got on track, took it inside, and started working on delivering home completions, homeowner issues. And you can see in January 22, it was not very pretty. This is 4 years after Florence. I mean, Florence happened in September of 18. This is January of 22. And there was clearly some issues getting homes completed. I find it interesting that the auditor brought just the contracts here, these 5 boxes. This is an indication of how complicated trying to have a federal program with state oversight and local government implementation with 80-plus contractors and 11,000 applications and 4,200 homeowners can be. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is what $1 billion worth of process looks like in a federal, state, local, and individual homeowner program reveals. So it's tough. So when they took it in internally in January in early 22, you can see that over that next year it really improved, as Auditor Bullock said. But in November, December, the administration said it's great that we've improved. 50, 60 home completions a month is good, but it's not good enough. So we looked at, that's when I went over there, and to their credit, they'd already put some things in place, and I managed to start working with local governments a little more closely, a little more with the NGOs. They started working with the homeowners a little more intense and more, excuse me, a little more intensely. And next thing you know, for the next year, Mr. Chairman, it got up to the average home completions of 116 a month. And for the record, I'm pretty sure that's the highest completion record of any disaster recovery program in the United States. As a matter of fact, in December of 24, they hit 144 homes completed in a single month. Then in mid-September of 24, nobody knows it better than the folks on this committee. The projective accounting situation happened. We found out we were going to run out of money. We had to do a lot of things really quickly. It was a tough 6 months, not just for Encore, not just for you guys as policymakers, but for the homeowners that we put on hold. That was a tough 6 months from the middle of September till about March, when we actually got that final 217. There was a really tumultuous time for everybody involved. But I'd like to think that over the last 200 days we've gotten on an even keel, and we're headed the way we want to, the way this committee wants us to, and most especially the disaster victims. There was a statement made, and I can't remember exactly who did it. Would we have all the homes in construction by the end of the year? We may not, but there won't be many left. Our plan is to have every single project in construction by the end of the year, and we should be really close, Mr. Chairman. You can see on the sheets, on this next sheet, I'll go, this shows you where we are literally to last month. So this is the data sheet that we share with you folks regularly. A lot of folks in the audience may not have it, but more importantly, this is the data sheet that we share with everybody on the ground in the 50 or so communities that we're working in. And what you see up there on the 3 Venn diagrams, just as a reminder, is to the far right, far and upper right, you see where we were a year ago. Then the next one coming from the right going to the left is where we were a month ago. And then the one, the bigger graph in October of 25 is where we are. And you can see that blue slice up there is getting much smaller over the year. That's the projects left to get done, get put in construction. It is our hope that it is our intention to be finished well before the legislative deadline of October. But I'd be fibbing if I said I could give you an exact date when we'll be done, because there's so much dynamic nature of completing these projects. And then the other thing I wanted to show and share with folks today is this is another communication sheet, quite frankly, that I probably haven't sent to legislators, but this is what we share with our local government folks. Again, I've alluded to before how important it is to involve local government, but this is the sheet we send to each county, to their county manager, to their inspection department, showing where we are in their county, and more importantly, and by the way, this is just 2 sheets of the report we send them. It can be as many as 15 or 20 sheets. I think this is Columbus County. You can see that there are 583 projects in Columbus. Robeson County has well over 1,000. We're in Pitt County. Pitt County has probably about 30 total, and I think all the projects are done in Pitt County. But what's important about this sheet and communicating with our local folks and our homeowners is that this sheet has the cover that says the snapshot of where we are. It has half a dozen pages in between of pictures and things that have transpired. But the last sheet is very important, but this is where we show the local governments and the people involved these are projects that have problems. We're telling you out loud we have a problem. You got to help us with them, and this has been very helpful in addressing the very complicated nature of doing a disaster recovery project. This is not like building these folks' home is not like building a subdivision or even building a custom house. This is a very complex project. Working with folks, LMI projects, low and middle income housing. You are working with folks that have a very low level of experience in real estate and construction and maintenance and home ownership. The list goes on, and almost all of them have some issue that makes what for most folks in this room a standard home building experience or remodeling experience. It makes it really hard to do because you have to start sometimes from less than ground zero. I was listening to some of the things you were saying, Senator Jarvis, about the complications in building on its own. When you add that you've got folks in this kind of situation with this volume, in some counties that may doing 30 or 40 new homes a year is standard, and we give them 200 homes on top of it, it overwhelms the system. And when you add the fact, and we haven't even mentioned it, but remember during this transition up in here, we had COVID happening. That wasn't exactly an easy time or place to do building. So it's not been, there's no excuses. Everybody knows we should have done better, quicker, faster, but there are a lot of factors involved with delivering this in a timely and efficient manner. So that's that. But these sheets have been very helpful. We send these out to all the folks every month. And then the last sheet, for the folks that don't know, the folks on the committee do know about this. This is a sheet we send in every week to your staff to make sure they see where we are. And this has been going on for 3+ years, I suspect. So it's too small to read, but if you have it in the packet, the chart on the bottom kind of shows the snapshot, literally that mirrors the other charts that I've shown you, Mr. Chairman. So this is kind of I wanted to do this 5 to 10 minutes to say we hear you loud and clear. We know there's issues. Everything that the auditor said about what to address, the early administrative hiccups, the scope and the criteria was too broad. Of course, there was an accounting projective function that we found out about in September that you guys addressed, both in the $30 million in November and the $50 million in January. Y'all know about it. Y'all know what happened as good as anybody. We have to agree that those things are problems and were problems, but you've heard those before. And what you've heard the auditor repeat more than once or twice is that over the last 2 years, it's been on the right track. Now, what I would say to you folks is there's a little bit of glimmer of light that we hope is not a train in the tunnel, and that we have worked really hard at NCORE to make sure our partners in Grow NC and for Western Recovery have all the lessons learned, all the mistakes made, and can see the very thing that you want, the best, most effective way to move forward for Western Recovery. We're going to get Eastern Recovery done just as quick as we can. Probably by the end of the year, we'll be over 4,000 homes completed. And while there are too many, any homeowner that's frustrated by not getting the home built or taking too long, there are too many of those, 1% maybe, 0.5%. But folks, let me tell you, there's almost 3,000 folks in Eastern North Carolina that this program, your assistance, HUD's money, that we've changed their lives. We've taken what a storm took away from them, and we've gave them a new lease on life. the families that this program has helped and addressed, I get calls sometimes on the weekends late at night or when I'm going by and checking on something. There are people still crying for what this program has done for them. So thank you on behalf of them. Could talk a lot more, Mr. Chairman. I don't, it's always the problem to be between you and lunch, but obviously I'll answer any questions that I can. I would ask, I'll give you all the numbers that I have in my head, but if we need to get questions answered, I'd be happy to get those. My staff is listening to this, so any questions that come up, they'll be glad to get to them probably by the close of business today.
Senator Smith?
Thank you for being so nice and starting on this end. And considering this is regarding Eastern North Carolina, the sheets that you said that you give to the municipalities.
Yes,
on
counties and
the
inspections.
counties.
Yes, ma'am.
I need to request for Pitt and Edgecombe. I would love for those to come to me as well,
Sure.
because I want to see how we're doing, how far we are, what it looks like.
All right.
You said that you may not be finished by the end of December, but the money that you received will adequately address.
Yes, ma'am. We think we're on budget. We're on target on budget. The legislation that y'all passed told us to be done by the end of October. By October of next year, we will be done by then, and we will have enough money, and we will have all the homes in our queue completed. There will be in full disclosure and foreshadowing, Mr. Chairman, there will need to be some kind of provision made to house the legacy files of the last 8 years of activity, but that'll be between the legislature and the governor's office to figure out how to manage that information, those files, and any tail coverage that would happen for those projects.
Okay. And so you're going to be here through the end. I heard all the compliments you got. So that means, well, I'm just saying, so that means you're working hard to get it done. And I look forward to continuing to be in contact with you because they're in contact with me,
Yes,
asking me questions. And like you said, people are crying because they are excited, the 3,000 people who do have a home. But since we looked at how long these floods have been, since 99 of Floyd, and we look at Florence in September 2018, that's a long time. And we do know that within what's happening in Western North Carolina with Helene and the projects that's already come out, the money that we stepped up as a state to provide really helped with that because it took 3 years before we even received any money from the federal level. So if it took 4 years for a hammer to swing, maybe once we got the money within those 3 years, the fourth year, it was when things started. So, now that we are where we are, I'm excited about making sure those 50 communities that you said that are remaining, that we get that work done. But I would also like to, if you could also send me a list of those communities, the name of those 50 communities as well, that would be greatly appreciated because I would like to follow up. So when people come to me, I can, come to you and ask for as much information as possible. Thank you for what you do and for your brevity.
Senator Mayfield? Senator Jarvis? Representative Ager? Representative Wilhelm?
Just one question.
Yes, sir.
I know we're talking about getting to the end by October, hopefully. But can you tell me the number of houses that are left right now that will be finished by the end or projected? The actual numbers.
And I can, but they're by categories. Let me back up here, Shelley. If you should, hopefully you've got it in your package, but what you can see there, as of the end of October, 92% of the projects have been completed. And there's, I have to look too, I can't remember the number right now. There's 9% in construction and 2% to get into construction. I can tell you this is about 3 weeks old. we're really close to having all projects in construction.
Okay, what's your average now houses being completed monthly?
A monthly, it's gone down a little bit. Right now, what you're seeing, if you look on this chart down here on the bottom, Representative Willingham, you can see we were doing really good a year ago. Then we had the problems with the funding that the legislature came to the aid, and lately it's gone down a little bit because we're literally having the latency. It's about a 7-month lag time. When we didn't have the ability to issue notices to proceed because we didn't have the money, we didn't want to get more extended. We're now seeing that, and hopefully we're actually going to be able to pick up a little bit before we start getting done. We're at last month. To answer your question directly, last month I think we had 49 homes completed.
Okay, follow up. Just one other question. Looking at all of that paperwork that has to be done to get a house built or to go through the process, are you doing anything, or you come up with some way that we can reduce all that paperwork there? I mean, I know a lot of it comes from the feds, but we also generate a lot. We have some bunch of requirements that I don't know if they can be revised or looked at, because I work with people who are going through that process, and it is a mess. And at the same time now, there were people assigned from INCOR to work with people as far as getting these applications filed and filling them out. And also at that time, there were people from HUD who were helping people to do that too. So I'm just wondering, is there some way you're looking at, how you can reduce that paperwork? Because a lot of it is redundant. I've gone through it. It's doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's government. So what are you guys doing looking at that?
I'll be brief. Representative Willingham and Senator Jarvis hit on it too. When you spend taxpayer money, when you spend public funds, there's got to be a process. It's a little ironic that this same nightmare that Alder Bullock pointed out that comes with HUD money and their accounting system, state money issuing checks in their system, and then the internal process, which was Salesforce, that is a very powerful tool to keep up with everything. Those three systems don't talk very well together. So you add those three systems with this kind of process with HUD, who, it is what it is. The irony is that's exactly the same thing that our auditor ran into trouble with, and the reason he couldn't do a full-blown audit. He's got a process too. If we could figure out a way to make the process quicker, that'd be great. But by the same token, you guys sit over there right now making sure that agencies like ours do the right thing with public money, and you have to have a process just like this meeting to make sure we're doing right. There are heck of a lot smarter people than me at INCOR, at EM, and God knows, Mr. Chairman, you need to know how much OSBM has helped us since y'all put them on us when we got the state money. OSBM has been an amazing partner, but for their help, we'd still be probably in a mess. But we've got to figure out a way that the legislature and the executive branch can work together and come up with a system that if I tell you this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, and then you got to let us do it. It's kind of hard. I mean, we live in a tough political time. We live in a time and that we have to have checks and balances, but we're going to have to give agencies the time and the ability to do them, and then do it. There's no question. There's no excuses. There's no sugarcoating the mess that was the first 2 or 3 years of INCOR. They probably tried to do too much. INCOR is not just, we've spent this whole morning on one state agency. INCOR was 6 things going on at once in the middle of COVID. And we haven't even talked. Senator Jarvis, do you know how hot the building market is in eastern North Carolina within 10 miles of the coast? There are hundreds of subdivisions right now. You try to build in coastal, near in eastern North Carolina, you're not worried about a $100,000 single-wide home that we're trying to replace for a disaster victim when they've got $600 million homes being built in subdivisions wall to wall. So COVID, the market in coastal North Carolina, the complexity of all this, not excuses, just explanations. And yes, sir, we got to find a better way to do it. Well, the good news is NC Grow recognizes that, and I have to think that getting projects done within the first year of a disaster has to be a record, and they should be complimented. And maybe they got a process that's going to work for everybody else.
Director Gibson and Auditor Bullock, we appreciate both of y'all being here today. Members appreciate all the questions. Senator Jackson, have you got any closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to add my thanks both to these gentlemen, our auditor for doing what he's done. And I'm going to go out on a limb here with Pryor. I've known him a long time, and I give him a hard time lots of times. But since you have been at NCOR, the tide has turned. I mean, we've got to put behind what happened prior to you. I mean, that was a fiasco. And there was a lot of other things going on during that time. But you have done a magnificent job with what we've given you to do. And I hope in the rebuild, they have gleaned the good of NCOR, which I believe they have to some degree. So maybe at the end of the day, the lessons the East had to learn is going to be beneficial for the folks in the West. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me reiterate, this is the staff of NCOR that's doing this work. And just to let you guys know, this report that auditors brought before you and the one that he brought, we also had a report in September. We've had two reports. This is number 33 and number 34 audits for us, or assessments as this one is. It's not like we're not getting looked at. If your business had to go through 33 or 34 audits, you'd be pretty well worn out too.
So, Mr. Gibson, it's been a long road to this point, and I'm certainly happy to see that the end may be in sight. And I just can't thank the people who have patiently endured what they've endured waiting for assistance from the government. I just would encourage you to take back one simple message. Don't take your foot off the gas, and let's get this thing done. I'll circle back and thank everyone who was involved in putting this together. It's no small task. And I have to give a special shout out to the technology folks. Without them, this would not have happened. I assume that everybody online has heard this. I'm making that assumption, so thank you for that. Thank you for all the hard work that you do. No further business. This meeting is adjourned.